And by the way, you know, when you're telling these little stories, here's a good idea. Have a point.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the channel if it's your first time. My name's Gareth and this is Books, Songs and Other Magic. And I want to do a video about short stories. But I also wanted to give a shout out to Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads. So Greg is becoming a friend on here, and he's, you know, I've appeared on his live streams. He needs to appear on me and Dave's show, I think. That'd be good. But anyway, he's been doing started a series of videos about short stories. So he recently did The Dead by James Joyce, and that was the second video in this series. And the first video was To Build a Fire by Jack London. They're really good videos about one short story, and he talks about them in detail and what they might mean and how much you like them. And it's a really cool series, and I think short stories don't get enough praise on BookTube. There's lots of people that would say, oh, I don't really like short stories because anthologies can be patchy and you get more substance or depth or level or layers in a novel. So I get both of those arguments. I think the anthology argument doesn't really take away the idea that you could find some gems, and that even if an anthology is patchy, it's probably got some really good things in it. So that's the way I react to that one. And the other one about having more depth and layers to a novel, I'll get to that in a moment, because I have got a point about that. But I want to talk in general about short stories before I get there. So Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads is doing this really cool series. So check his series out. I'll link the videos below. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about Jonathan, who's got a fantastic channel as well, a really successful channel as well. So I'm sure you subscribed to it already. Science fiction channel, and he was doing a comparison between short stories and novels, and he chose to read The Martian Chronicles and Stories of Your Life by Ted Chiang as the comparison to what he already understands as something he loves, which is novels. So he was trying to delve more into short stories, and his conclusions, I think, misses the point about short stories, but we'll get there in a minute. So short stories. Why do I love short stories so much? Well, you can trace that back to my early spark of love with storytelling and with science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, that kind of thing, horror, all those kind of things, from my love of the Twilight Zone. So, again, I know I've talked about Twilight Zone quite a lot on the channel, but I do love it. But the thing is, it's a really great example of short stories. And an interesting thing about the length of the story in the Twilight Zone is the original series ran for 5 years. And season 1, season 2, season 3, and season 5, they're all half-an-hour episodes. And season 4, they made an exception, made them an hour long. And actually, the episodes really suffered. The script suffered from being too long. So you could easily say, yeah, but you can put more depth into it, you can put more character into it. But the magic of the half-hour shows was they said so much, and there was so much characterization, and you were so invested in the characters in a really short space of time. You don't actually need lots of time to get involved with a character if it's written well. And actually, with season 4 of The Twilight Zone, that was its biggest fault. There were some cracking stories, but so many of the episodes in season 4 shouldn't have been...
Screenrant.com. Season 4 is recognised as the worst season of The Twilight Zone.
Thanks. So Alexa's just reinforcing what I'm saying. So that's very nice of her. I didn't ask her to do that. So thank you for chiming in. I don't know if you heard that, but she said it's recognised as the worst season. And that's the thing. They're hour-long episodes, and it doesn't work as well for that particular kind of storytelling. But they are great examples of storytelling. And I encountered the Twilight Zone and fell in love with the Twilight Zone very early in my life. And I was reading short stories much more than I was reading novels when I was a teenage reader. everything I want from a novel I can get from a short story as well. You know, if it's one of those short stories that does those things, because not every short story hits those different elements that you love in a story, but you do get some that do. You do get some that have got great characters, and you do get some that have got depth to them. So I think it's a little bit misleading to just think that length necessarily means depth. Doesn't always. So what do I expect from a story? So regardless of the length of the story, I hope there's a good idea that sparks my interest in the first place. That idea should then be explored by interesting characters, and there should be, hopefully, a very interesting way that the author's telling me the story. So the prose could be interesting, or really nice to read, or could have some really choice words in it that make the line flow really nicely, or have a good rhythm to it, or could have some lovely language, you know, some sort of poetic language. So the prose can be important. The structure, so the idea of the flow, the way that the story develops, the beginning, middle, and the end, all those kind of the shape of it, that's also important. And the ending is also important. So most of the time I'm quite happy with endings, but some short stories deliberately don't have an ending, and it's more like an immediate kind of vision of something, and it's not necessarily got movement in it. So that's a thing as well. But that's what I'd expect from a story. All of those things you can get from a short story. So some short stories are like 50, 70 pages. And if you get a short story that is that long, then absolutely you can do all sorts of things with that amount of words. So yeah, I do think just off the cuff, it's a bit misleading to just assume that length means depth. So I'd like to talk about some of the short stories that really kind of started my love of the short story, and actually my love of reading, because my love of reading really started with short stories and novelizations. But short stories were where I really discovered authors and got excited about language and the way that different authors had a different voice when they wrote. So there's things like Harlan Ellison's stories, and my two favourites by Harlan Ellison is Repent, Harlequin Said the TikTok Man, and the horrific story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Two amazing stories. And then there's Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder, which, I don't know, about a year ago I said was my all-time favourite short story. Probably still is. And then The Long Rain as well. That had a big impact on me. The atmosphere in that story is just amazing, and it really is really vivid. So it's literally about rain being really destructive because it's so relentless. In this particular situation on Venus, I think it is. So that's a really interesting story from Ray Bradbury. And there's Damon Knight's amazing story To Serve Man, which was a Twilight Zone episode as well, a very famous Twilight Zone episode. But that's a great story. And there's Small Assassin as well by Ray Bradbury. That's a really great, a really interesting and quite unique story that kind of plays on almost postnatal depression in a way, because it's about this fear of this baby after it's been born, and it's got a nice little twist at the end. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omulus by Ursula K. Le Guin. That is a really important dystopian story, and quite a chilling story as well. Very short, but it really does have a lot of impact, and it really kicks you in the gut. And similarly, a very similar story, I think. Not exactly the same, but it's got the same kind of tone, same kind of kick to it. And that's Shirley Jackson's story, The Lottery. So both of those I read when I was younger. And you've got Robert Sheckley's stories. I love Robert Sheckley's short stories. Richard Matheson's short stories as well. Tons of Richard Matheson's short stories. And Stephen King's short stories. I mean, come on, Quid as Ink. It's an amazing story. And it's so vivid, and I think you do really get a sense of the characters. I mean, Stephen King's a great writer, obviously, but he does some really good short fiction. He's good at both. He's good at short fiction. Some people aren't so good at short fiction. Like I discovered recently that I don't think John Wyndham is as good with short fiction as he is with novels. And there are some people like Carl Nelson and Ray Bradbury that absolutely concentrated on short fiction. Tons and tons of their work. Most of their work is short stories. But you do get people like Stephen King that can do both and has done both and likes to kind of regularly go back to one or the other. He doesn't just do novels, doesn't just do short story collections or novellas as well. There's some of his books have been collections of novellas as well. So he's an interesting one as well. So I was reading a lot of Stephen King stuff when I was younger, and if you go to a more recent discovery that I've had, I absolutely love the 2 books that were brought out by Ted Chiang. Easily 2 of my favourite books, but they're short story collections. These are the only things available by Ted Chiang. They're fantastic collections. I would recommend it to anybody. And my favourite story, I mean, it's hard to pick because there's so many good ones, but there's a wonderful story where you really do get invested in the characters. You really care for these kind of Tamagotchi kind of AI robot pets in this story called The Life Cycle of Software Objects. It's such a brilliant story. So that's got a lot of impact. It's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then there's other more that's quite philosophical, but even more philosophical stories in that collection. It's a fantastic story. I can't remember what it's called, about exploring the idea that truth is not what is evident. It's not what you see, or it's not only what can be historically recorded, but it's also the feelings that were experienced by the people that experienced the incident as well. It's a really good story that explores that. It does really make you think, actually, yeah, the truth is not just what happened, it's how people felt when it happened. Really, really good story, and it kind of proves that point. So yeah, Ted Chiang is a fantastic thought-provoking writer, and his 2 short story collections are amazing. So I do think that there's something very powerful about short stories. There's a great short story I read by J.G. Ballard, and it's kind of exploring this overpopulation thing, and basically the apartments these people live in, and I think it's a first person story. They just get smaller and smaller and smaller to deal with the overcrowding of the population, and the landlord keeps telling them that they have to make their apartment smaller, and so they can get another tenant in, and it's like it becomes ridiculous where he's sleeping upright, and that's all he can do in this room because it's so small, and it's not really a room, it just sounds like a cupboard. And it's just a really, really good story. It's powerful. It's got a great point. It's written really well. And, there are people who would say, yeah, but you can put all that stuff in a novel, and then you can add all these other things, like all these back history of the characters, and you can have more beats to it. There are lots more levels to it. So every story has I just said the word beat, so like lots of different beats. So when I'm trying to write a story or write a novel, I think, well, how many beats is it going to get? How long is this thing going to be? How many incidents are there? How many changes are there? How many times is there a single moment that's separate from the others? A beat. And short stories clearly have less of them, and which makes them a short story. But some novels, the beats are actually the same, but there's loads and loads of extra stuff in there that doesn't need to be there. And how many times have you thought, well, that was a good novel, but it's 100 pages too long, or it's 200 pages too long, or some of it just meandered across stuff that wasn't interesting anymore, or kind of it lost its point halfway through and then kind of managed to claw it back at the end. Novels don't always do what they're supposed to be doing, and that's keeping the essence of the greatness of the story maintained and sustained through the whole thing. And short stories don't really have that issue because they are to the point. They don't necessarily sacrifice character or depth, because it could be a fairly long short story that can do those things, or even sometimes in a short story, if you write it really well, even in a short story, you can be there straight away with the characters and relate to them and have empathy with them. So I do think it's an interesting exploration of the form. But going back to Jonathan's point, Words in Time is his channel, fantastic channel. It's a really good video, but I don't think that's his approach of analyzing and judging and or assessing, evaluating stories in its short form is about did it meet my expectations? Is it doing what I'm expecting a novel to do? That kind of thing. And then saying, well, therefore I think one's better than the other. You know, he decided that in the end, he did this little exploration and decided that novels were better. But the reason why I say I think he misses the point, and I'm going to try and articulate this as best I can, but I could go wrong and it could mean that I'm just sounding like I'm saying waffle. But the story, whatever form it's in, is its own thing. It's got its own identity as that story. And if you decide not to read as many short stories or collect as many short stories, because that really lame excuse that some anthologies are patchy, I mean, that doesn't change the fact you could have some absolute gems in there. But if you decide for that reason, or you decide because, well, I've realised I'm more into novels, then you're missing out on those short stories that are going to blow your mind. Because there are some stories that will blow your mind, and they are short stories. So I think that's the point, really, that if you just, I don't really know what the benefit is of deciding whether or not you like novels more than you like short stories, or whether you're going to say that short stories are better than novels, or you're going to say novels are better than short stories. They're all stories. And if someone recommends to you a particular story or a particular author that's really good at short stories, it would be such a shame if you thought, oh yeah, but I'm not really into short stories, so I'm not going to read it. Because it could be a great story. These are stories. Drinking game. Every time I say the word story, take a shot. But you get you might not get my point. I'm hoping you get my point. That actually the length of the story is irrelevant, except for the fact that sometimes people underestimate and underrate and undersell the power of a great short story. That's the only reason why, in my eyes, it's worth talking about a difference, because so many people don't take short stories seriously, because they say, oh, well, in that amount of words, how can you tell a story with depth? But you can. And, they're different stories. It's like, say, for example, A Sound of Thunder, right? I love that story. But it's not got massive character in it. It's not got that many beats to it, because it's only, 20 pages long or something. But it's such a great story. And if you said, oh, yeah, but it's not that good because it's not got character in it, it's not got these other things that I expect from a novel, you're missing out on reading A Sound of Thunder. They're different stories. I don't think it's about the length of the story. So I think you should all read. If you like reading, read short stories and read novels, and you'll get some great stories in both forms. That's kind of what I'm saying. So just to go back, just on my page of notes, I want to read more J.G. Ballard stories, because I've got loads and loads of J.G. Ballard, and I need to get more into them. I've read some stuff by him, but I want to get more, and there's like 2 massive collections of his short stories that I need to read. I've got tons of Roald Dahl collections, and I want to read more Roald Dahl. And Ken Liu as well, because I've read some really cool Ken Liu stuff, so I wanted to look more into that. And just a couple of other people I wanted to mention. So H.G. Wells' Country of the Blind, that's a great story, and that really had a big impact on me when I was in school. I did that one at school. And also, I've been talking a little bit on the channel about Hiromi Kawakami, and I've just read her first short story collection, the one that was the first thing that she published, and it's really interesting. And I'm going to get her latest one as well, Dragon something, and that short story. She's gone back to short stories again after a gap where she's written lots of novels. And I think she's really interesting, but they're quite odd stories. But again, the way she writes those particular stories, it couldn't be sustained for a huge amount of pages. It just wouldn't work. It would become too random, really. So yeah, the way that she writes really fits a short story, and that's it's so often the case that short stories are short stories and they have to be short stories, and if they were any longer, it would take away the essence of them. So again, going back to the idea that a good story is a good story. If you read both things and you're open to read both things, open to collecting both things, if you like buying and owning books, you will get some great stories in both forms, novels and short stories. Okay, so it's not a massive coincidence that my first book was the 10 Tales of Transformation. So a lot of these stories, I think, could only be short stories. The longest story in there is a 12,000 word story about characters that I ended up writing a novel about. So you could argue that one has been extended into a novel, albeit with a different plot. But I carried that on. But all of the others, really, they could only be short stories. That's the way that it made sense. I wouldn't want to expand on those stories, really, because I have wondered about one in particular, the last one in the collection, called Orphan Lena. It's kind of it started off, the idea of it was to write a story about obsession. And then I ended up thinking, actually, no, I'm going to do one about a man being manipulated by this kind of lust that ends up being a trait in this alien species, where they can create an artificial lust that allows them to manipulate that person that lusts after them. That was the idea. And I have wondered about making that story into more of a novel and expanding on the ... ending. There's a bit of a ... ending in that last story. And I thought, well, but it takes away the magic a little bit. There's something really cool about the immediacy and the kind of quick kick that you get from the short story in some of these forms. So yeah, this book is an illustration of my love of short stories as well. So there we go. I'm currently writing a new short story collection as well, which is also why I've got it in my head that I do like the form. I really do like the form, and I shouldn't be so... Because I almost put it off, thinking, oh yeah, I should write a novel. I shouldn't write short. I should write a novel. I shouldn't write a short story collection. And that's the thing, there's lots of beef against short stories. I don't think it's justified. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Tell me the short stories that you love. Tell me some of the short stories I should find out. Seek out some short story authors that I haven't mentioned that I should seek out. That would be awesome. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. Stay curious, everyone.
Paint me a picture